Welcome to another edition of Writer's Block with me, Mark Lever, and regular panellist Gary Thomas and our guest star Richard Holliday. Today we'll be discussing the differences between novel writing and script writing. I hope you enjoyed the show. Now let's meet our guest, Richard Holliday. Please tell us a bit about yourself and what your previous experience is as far as sort of novel writing, and then very quickly a bit about script writing.
Okay, very quickly, yeah. My name's Richard. I've written 20 short stories. I've done a little bit of sort of novel writing, nothing really finished yet. And I'm just working on my first short film script with you and Gary.
And Gary, can you tell us a bit about your novel experience? And
So I've just finished writing my autobiography. So that was really interesting experience. I found it much easier than writing scripts. I've written 2 feature scripts and 1 spec TV script as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and now let's get on with the show. In every episode, we like to get everyone on the show to pick a script. So, Gary, would you like to please explain what script you have chosen this time and tell us something about it?
Yeah, so my script this time is My Best Friend's Wedding. I love romantic comedies and wedding comedies in particular. This one stars Julia Roberts, and she kind of plays the bad guy in a way because she goes after the guy that's going to get married in order to tell him that she is in love with him. And of course it doesn't go right at all, it goes horribly wrong. So yeah, I really like it, and I've actually written my first feature screenplay was a wedding comedy, so it was partly inspired by My Best Friend's Wedding.
I think having known you for quite a while, I know this is the script or the film that you constantly bring up, basically.
My favourite film, I think.
So, I mean, what sets it apart from like every other sort of rom-com, or like, I mean, you're quite a big fan of rom-coms, so this must have been quite a special script. Basically.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it was one of the first sort of wedding comedies that I saw, I think. And I just kind of, it's just very funny, and it's kind of it's normally the guy, normally the main character is the guy, and in this one the main character is the Julia Roberts character, and she's chasing after the guy and she just can't do anything right. And there's lots of obstacles that get in the way, as you'd expect from a good romantic comedy. And it's I think, I don't know if they made it now it would be something different, but you could see this is kind of where they got maybe Bridesmaids from, the female characters and everything. I think it maybe influenced that partly.
Okay, thanks so much. Richard, what is your chosen script?
My script today is The Martian, obviously adapted from the sort of novel, which obviously I'm a big fan of, and yeah.
Well, what would you say, having read both, or having read the novel, and what's the film? Would you say it's a faithful script adaptation?
I would say yes. Yeah, it's a very faithful adaptation. I'd say they got about 85% of the material of the book into the film. They did it very sympathetically, and I thought they achieved a lot with that.
I think you can confidently say that in the film, they needed to get the actor for the protagonist correct. So I mean, Matt Damon was amazing in the film. Mm-hmm. But how much on the script side of things, and also did you get a lot of that in the book? Was the main character because he essentially ran the whole film pretty much. Yeah. And also he's on his own a lot, so it really relied on the sort of acting ability. Yeah, basically.
I would say they definitely got it right with Matt Damon, and the writing of the character. They used the sort of humour that's prevalent that goes with the character in the book, goes into the film, and also sort of guides the audience through. I think that as a sort of coping mechanism, and also it kind of stops the audience from getting bored with too much of the sort of hard science that's throughout the book and the film. It sort of adds a nice sort of approachable layer, so I think they did pretty well with that.
I think I remember there was not too much sort of scientific jargon, but I mean it did become quite scientific throughout the film. So I mean, did the book have a lot of the sort of explanation over sort of science, or?
I think the book was pretty well researched, and that goes into the film as well. But I think with the character being a relatable, sort of almost ordinary character, that means that sort of explanation was kind of more accessible to the reader. Whereas if it was a more dry or less interesting character, it would have gone over the reader or the viewer's head much more sort of easily.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Thanks very much for choosing your scripts this time. And let's move on to our first topic. Our first topic of the episode is the advantages and disadvantages of novel to script writing. Gary, would you like to start off the debate, the discussion?
Yeah, I've recently written my autobiography, having written three feature screenplays, which was a really interesting experience. I thought I would hate it because it's just such a longer form and you need so many more words in a book. I heard someone say that a good screenplay is about 10,000 words, maybe 20,000. And for a book, you're looking at least 60,000 words. So there's a massive difference. But with that, I actually found in writing there's more room for explanation. So any kind of character explanations or character changes, you can really there's much more room to write about that and how those transitions happen in novel form or in book form than you can in screenplay writing. Screenplay writing is much more sparse. I don't know how you found it.
Yeah, I would generally agree with what you said. There's definitely more room in sort of prose writing for more description. But yeah, I think definitely I feel writing for screen. I've recently done the opposite of you, Gary. I've written mostly short stories, a couple of books, not finished. And I've recently attempted my first proper sort of short film screenplay. And I'm feeling like a different experience entirely. They are two separate, totally different experiences, just about what suits the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, exactly.
If the story you want to tell is more sort of visual, write the screenplay. If it's more sort of, I don't want to say more dense, but more detailed almost, you can do more with sort of straight novel sort of format.
You can go into the mind of the character as well.
Yeah.
Really well, even in autobiography, I can kind of write about how I was feeling, which would be very difficult. I would have to get that over in a single scene, maybe in a screenplay, and it would. It's better to be visual in a screenplay rather than just a lot of dialogue. In a book, kind of doesn't really matter. You could do it either way. So I kind of like that as a book writing, from sort of in my head, as it were, in the character's head.
Yeah, I think with sort of like writing a book, you can put it into the reader's head.
Yeah,
with the sort of careful use of like description.
Yeah,
and sort of descriptive words, you can just sort of paint a picture in the mind that you might not be able to do with a screenplay or even with a finished film.
Yeah.
Well, I think with script writing, in a way, you have to be quite clever because essentially you are looking at things in the visual mean. So therefore, when you're thinking, okay, this character's feeling this, or whether you force it in the dialogue or whether you try and basically because it's visual, really you should be sort of trying to get it out. Like, how can you tell it? Whether it's interacting with something, whether it's interacting with a photo or something like that. So generally, you basically have to kind of teach your mind to kind of think in a different method, essentially. So Richard, you've just started dabbling in to script writing, having gone the other way than Gary. So Jenny, how have you felt the experience? Has it made you want to carry on script writing? So what do you think?
It's been pretty good. I mean, it's a totally different experience because usually when I write sort of novel format, it is like thousands and thousands of words. I have no concept of sort of brevity. So it's different to sort of get myself into that mindset of just focusing on like a few characters and really sort of holding it down. In terms of when I write more screenplays, yes, because I've got ideas that I think would work as more visual sort of stories. So and I think definitely I don't want to sort of pen myself into being one kind of writer. It's good to be versatile and be able to write sort of different types of stuff.
I think script writing tends to be much more tight in for writing. With novel writing, okay, you've got a bigger word count, and maybe you've got more of a freedom to kind of just start kind of writing whatever kind of comes to mind, and I suppose you can obviously edit yourself afterwards. So yeah, with script writing, you tend to have like a set kind of duration over, you need to cover this like within a certain amount of pages. Like for example, for beginning needs to be so many pages, middle, blah blah. So has that been quite a sort of transition to kind of get used to kind of suddenly having to condense yourself essentially?
I would say so. Yeah, I mean, from the sort of script that we're working on, even you would say it's too long. It's always too long, but it's good to sort of just sort of practice really, and just get into that sort of writing less is more. That is the sort of key thing I'm getting from the experience of doing like a sort of screenplay, is just less is more. You can do a lot less with.
I think one of the sole reasons, I suppose, is the fact that essentially every minute, like you work out for costs per minute essentially. So yeah, that's why kind of everything is kind of less is more. Like, okay, novel writing, okay, I suppose you're thinking of publishing costs or like how much it costs per page or whatever. But with filmmaking, obviously per page you're looking at thousands of pounds basically per minute. So that's why it's like, how do you tell the story in the shortest amount of time, or like get the right sort of pacing?
And I think in terms of sort of filmmaking as well, you also got to consider how it's going to be made as well, because when you're sort of writing a novel, you can go as far as you want with sort of world building, setting. You can create like immense worlds where everything's doing this, that, the other. But with a sort of film, you have to be more grounded in sort of reality. So I think that's an interesting sort of dichotomy between the two sort of formats.
Yeah, I think definitely, and actually I think we're all kind of storytellers, and it's finding the best medium for that story. So I think with filmmaking, with screenplay writing, it's like everything that's on that screen has to be relevant to the story you're telling and to that character. And it's interesting as a writer to really kind of think like that, because obviously once your film begins to get made, if you're lucky, then all of these people come on board as collaborators and set designers and all sorts, and they really think about what should be in that room, or what should be what that character should wear. It's not always exactly in the script, but it will be relevant to that character and that story, and they would have got those kind of ideas from the actual screenplay that they've written. So I think that's really interesting. And with a novel, you don't have to worry about those limitations. It's also kind of good in a novel not to describe everything, but then you can really play around with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a limit to, say something like Twilight. I mean, there's a limit to how many pages you can go on about someone's emotions.
There's always a limit with Twilight. Yeah.
So, by the way, thanks very much for your input on advantages, disadvantages of sort of each medium. But yeah, I think that's it for this topic, and yeah, now on to the next section. So Gary, do you want to please explain what film we're about to show and a brief description about the film?
Yeah, so the film this time is Don't Marry Him, Have Me. It's was written and directed by me and produced by Mark Lever. And it's a short monologue, actually. It was one of my first attempts at a romantic comedy short film. Enjoy.
Dave, I wanted to tell you how much I love you. How much each of the days we've spent together meant to me. And I wanted to show this in such a big way that I couldn't think of any. And then it hit me. It's not you that should be getting married at all. I know it may seem strange to say this, especially now. Actually, it is you that should be getting married, but not to him. I despised this marriage ever since I heard about it. I know I said I thought he was taking advantage of you, and I know it was mean of me to say that. How I kept looking worried every time there was a possibility of me and him being alone together at parties. Awkward conversations just waiting for someone to interrupt. I was sure you could tell how I felt.
Now for our second topic, true stories versus fiction. Richard and Gary, what do you prefer to write, and what format do you prefer to write in?
I was quite surprised at how kind of easy, in quotes, easy writing my autobiography was compared to writing scripts. I just thought it's so many more words, it's going to be so difficult, and I had to read it to make sure I understand it. But it was actually quite a lot easier than I thought it would be. But within that, I kind of go back to the storytelling thing, because I still have to put my life into an interesting, engaging story. It just happened to be true. But I think that's one of the things I did early on quite well, was I could see my own kind of journey, my own arc in the book. And I think that structure has always been there. So yeah, that was really interesting for me to see that process.
Would you think about adapting it into like a feature film script, or do you think it belongs as a novel?
Possibly. I think some of it is maybe worthy of a feature film, and then there'd be like, maybe you'd have to invent other stuff to kind of put in the middle somewhere. So yeah, I think it's kind of, it's definitely, as it is, it's definitely a book, as it is. I think I'd possibly rather give it to someone else to see what they made of it if they were to adapt it, rather than me actually adapting it. I'm not sure where I would go with it. Maybe I might give it to Richard. I don't know.
So also I know that you've written a monologue, which is essentially based on a specific kind of, or it kind of covers only kind of part of what the novel, what the book covers. So basically, how did you find going from that to, basically expanding? I suppose you expanded it.
Well, I think because my book writing and the monologue was also my first piece of theatre writing, and I got funding from the Arts Council to do both. So the Arts Council funded the first 30,000 words of my book and the one-man play. What I said in the Arts Council funding application was the book would inform the monologue, and actually because of time constraints and when we were performing the monologue, it actually became the other way around. So the monologue informed the book, so there were some scenes from the monologue that are basically exactly the same in the book form, because I'd heard another actor read it out and I knew it kind of read well, and that was really interesting. So that's why I kind of really want to do an audio book of my book, so I can hear how that reads. And I think that'd be kind of really valuable, and kind of, really kind of listen to it, because I kind of read a lot of books on audiobook anyway. So, but the first piece of theatre writing was a really interesting experience, and I definitely want to do more.
So, Richard, what format do you prefer? Do you prefer to write true stories, or do you prefer fiction?
I prefer to, when I'm writing, I initially come up with a concept, like a sort of an idea in which the story hangs around. Then I create like a cast of characters, and that's basically where it goes from there. I don't really base it on real life, to be honest. I kind of think because my early work is very much sort of based in sort of science fiction, space opera, in the middle of deep space, it's as far away from the sort of mundane reality of life. So there's quite a big gulf there. But I think as it's sort of developed, it's become a little bit closer to home with more sort of human themes and sort of emotions and stuff like that. But I wouldn't be able to write a book like Gary. I wouldn't be able to write an autobiography. It'd be about sort of 10 pages.
Short story, then.
Yeah, it'd be short. It'd be a very short story.
So you've also had some of your books read out.
That's right. I've had some of my sort of short stories read in audio format, which I definitely feel is a really good experience. I think for yours it'd be really good.
How do you find that helps having it read out?
I think it's like it's essentially like a sort of script reading. You get a feel for the characters, all the different characters, their different sort of personalities, their different traits, and you also get to hear if the dialogue works. Basically.
Yeah.
So it's very useful for that, but it's also a different way of experiencing the story because we are storytellers.
Yeah.
And an audiobook is literally telling the story.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's good.
Do you think with sort of true stories and fiction, do you think they both kind of lend itself to both formats, or do you think maybe one kind of lends itself to one more than the other? Like, so would you say true stories, I mean, maybe is more of a natural fit to novel writing, or?
I think writing has always got to have a bit of the author's sort of personality and experience in there, even if it's just sort of subconsciously. So, like, the main character can always have a few traits that are sort of, the author can identify with, or that are a contrast to what the author has.
Yeah.
So I think there's always going to be a little bit of truth in fiction, whichever way you write it. So,
and that's kind of interesting in films now, films that are based on the true story. Some of them have actually taken the label based on a true story off because they want the film to kind of stand on its own sort of legs and see how people react to the story without saying it's based on a true story. So I think that's quite an interesting way of looking at things.
It's quite interesting you say that, because even I would say films that are mostly fictional, like I think one of the first, I'm sure there was probably some before, but Fargo kind of marketed itself as a true story, and even though what maybe, I don't know, only a small percentage was actually based on it, so it's kind of like, and also it's become quite a big thing with horror films. Horror films do like to say that it's based on a true story because obviously it brings things like, makes the audience think this could actually happen and therefore make things much scarier, essentially. So it's quite interesting, I think.
So what I said wasn't true, basically.
I think also with the sort of novel writing, it's more personal to the author, because with the sort of screenplay, it goes through several redrafts.
Yeah.
And the kind of, I don't want to say the writer gets forgotten with the screenplay.
But you get different writers on a screenplay.
Exactly.
You almost never get that on a novel at all.
I think collaborative sort of novels are rare. They're possible, but I think it definitely stands more as sort of like one person sort of, experience.
You have ghostwriters on some novels, but you never really get to know who they are.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah, I think with true stories, like books, they especially if the actual person has actually got a lot to say for themselves, or a lot has happened in their life. I mean, they can be, there doesn't have to be a set length to cover like all the aspects of their life, essentially. But with script writing, because obviously, time costs money, I think I know that with Steve Jobs' latest film, I think it covers up until the release of the first iMac. And so therefore it doesn't cover all for sort of, I suppose, iTouch, iPhone and all of that. So with film, I think because time costs money, they tend to maybe theme it or look at a certain angle of their life. And I suppose it kind of makes sense as far as the narrative structure goes, because obviously our lives don't, generally, I suppose you've got the obvious kind of beginning, middle, end. We're alive, middle, our life, and
but that's actually one of the reasons why I liked about my autobiography, because I tried for several years to kind of write an autobiography of some sorts, but there wasn't, I didn't have enough kind of good memories that I could kind of say this is what I've started at, and there wasn't that change yet. I think when I'm looking back over maybe 10 years ago, I couldn't see that I've changed a big deal, but now more recently I could have, so I was able to write my autobiography. And actually it turned out pretty well.
Well, thanks very much for all your inputs on that topic, and now let's move on to the next part of the show, which is my introduction to my pit film. My second film of the series is If This Isn't Love music video, written and sung by my brother Rob Lever. It has received over 2,000 views and it was directed by Gary Thomas, and it was produced and written by me, and it actually features a screen version of my brother. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the film.
creaking door is just the start of a hurricane around my head. But I won't blink till I'm torn apart. The walls can take it all instead. They're shaking, trembling on my behalf. I'm making hard work for us all. If this isn't love, then I must be on my own. Think it over a while. Yes, I know this is a strange one, and it's keeping me up at night. And I'm thinking of you, but are you thinking of me? As I'm travelling down this one-way street with no horizon, and we're miles and miles apart. Yes, we're miles and miles apart, and on the floor.
We are now at the end of the second episode. If you'd like to discuss any of the topics we have talked about today, please head over to our Twitter. If you'd like to talk to any of our guests, you've got the Twitter accounts underneath them right now. And I hope you have enjoyed the show and look forward to seeing you next time.